Hi, hello, I'm Sam Harrison. I read, review and discuss fantasy and science fiction books, and today we are reviewing Firefight. This is the second novel in Brandon Sanderson's Reckoners trilogy. I have also read the short story / novella Mitosis. I'll be covering that in a YouTube short, so if you're interested in that, it'll be available eventually. And I have already reviewed Steelheart, so if you're interested in these Reckoners books and what they're like, then maybe that review is the best one for you, because this one's obviously a sequel. So I will be discussing elements of the story of Steelheart, and there's a couple of things you kind of can't get around discussing, if that makes sense. So if you have not read Firefight, I would not watch this review. Not Firefight, sorry. If you haven't read Steelheart, I wouldn't watch this review. If you haven't read Firefight, you are free to watch this review. Let's get right into things and talk a little bit about the story and where this book starts and what kind of the pitch for this. So at the end of Steelheart, the Reckoners obviously kill Steelheart, but they also find out that one of their team, Megan, was secretly an epic, was secretly a super-powered supervillain. Now, as you guys know, if you've read that original, and you shouldn't still be watching if you haven't, because I've literally just spoiled the ending, the epics, the epics in this story are kind of like supervillains, but the characters, the human characters, the central force of the story, the Reckoners, are kind of like freedom fighters from this kind of supervillain regime. Kind of reminds me of the world of Old Man Logan, where it's like him and Blind Hawkeye drive across America, but America is split up into being owned by all these like supervillain tyrants, and that's kind of what you have in the world of the Reckoners. So David, who's the main character, is from New Cargo, used to be Chicago, which was ruled by Steelheart. And over the time since they've killed Steelheart and they've freed the city, they've been kind of harassed by epics that are affiliated with a place called Babelar, which is Babylon Restored. I think that's doesn't matter. Babelar is what everyone calls it, but it used to be New York. And they come to the point where they're like, well, we're constantly being harassed by epics from New York. Megan, who used to be a Reckoner, aka Firefight, which the book is named after, has been seen in New York and working for Regalia, who is the lead epic there. And the interesting thing, she has a lot more, Regalia has a lot more of the like sub epics working for her. So she has Megan, sorry, my eyes are really itching for some reason. So she's got Megan, she's got another one called Newton, who's able to redirect force that is applied to her. So say she's slapped, the person who is slapped feels the pain, feels the force, and she feels nothing. And then there's also an epic called Obliteration, who believes that he has been kind of chosen by God to cleanse the earth, and he's basically going from city to city, blowing stuff up until he gets bored, and then charging himself up by sitting in the sunlight for a few days and then exploding. So really interesting kind of cast of epic villains. But I think that because we have all these sub-villains, one of the interesting things is that this book kind of feels a little less focused. So book one, it's very much the Reckoners must kill Steelheart. And book two is like the Reckoners are in Babelar trying to figure out what's going on. There's less of a explicit mission. Once Obliteration gets involved, which is quite early in the book, but once Obliteration gets involved, we do get a bit more like, oh, we should probably be doing this specific thing, that specific thing being like facing down obliteration. Okay. So, obviously they have to take down obliteration, which is a big thing, because he's so dangerous and he has this history of destroying cities. But he's also extremely powerful, and he has a teleporting power, which makes him insanely hard to kill. We also have the Regalia, who can basically see anything in the city or within her range of vision, because she's got she can see through any water, and she has flooded the city. So really interesting setup, and I like the cast of villains, but I think that because there's so many of them, the book does end up feeling a little bit unfocused. The one thing I would say is that Sanderson was really able to surprise me with the ending and what was really going on. I didn't guess that at all. I had a few ideas and a few theories, but basically the whole thing I didn't guess, and I thought that was pretty good, to be honest. I liked the new characters that we get to meet. So because we're not in our home territory of New Cargo, we get to meet the New York, or the Babalar force of Reckoners. Barry, now you're purring right next to the microphone. I wonder if you can hear the purring louder than me. I am sorry. There's nothing I can do about it. He's comfy. So, so we've got this new cast of Reckoners. So we've got Val, we've got XL, we've got Mizzy, and they've also just recently lost their David, basically their point man, who was a guy called Sam. Seems like a cool dude, and he was using their epic gadget, which is a thing called the Spiral, which basically is a water-based jetpack, which kind of lets the Reckoners keep up with the epics, or escape in many cases the epics. It's used quite a lot in the book as a bit of a we need to do a thing, and and we didn't really have anything like that in the first book. I guess we had the tensors, but with a whole city that's underwater, it's kind of harder to do that. Very interesting dichotomy between New Cargo and Babalar Restored. So the cities themselves are very different. New Cargo was a very oppressed city that felt almost like Nazi Germany style of oppression, but a lot of that, as we now know, was playing into Steelheart's weakness, where he could only be killed by somebody who didn't fear him. And then in Babalar, the lead villains, the lead villain Regalia, is not kind of preoccupied in that same way. So one of the most interesting things is that the people of Babalar seem to actually be pretty happy. They're well fed. They, yes, live on the roofs of skyscrapers and apartment buildings and stuff, but they are having a pretty good time. They're having parties. They're spraying art and graffiti. And there's lots of really interesting aspects to the city, and the people there are a lot more carefree, and that even includes the Reckoners. So the Reckoners are not as downtrodden and scarred as the characters were in book one. So yeah, it is a really interesting change, and the one thing that I kind of wish about these books is that we had a bit more time in them. So one of the interesting things in this book is you get to see the world between the cities. So obviously they're driving from Chicago to New York, so you get to see the land in between. You get to see, raiders and motorways filled with abandoned cars and all this sort of stuff. And that I really liked. So I do really, really wish we had time in the outside world. If I could give you guys a wish list for what I want from Calamity, which is the final book in the series, I would say I would like to see an entire book set in the lands between these cities. So, the wasteland that's full of bedraggled survivors and pirates and raiders and cannibals and all this mad shit. Like, that would be such an interesting book. And even though these books were written with the YA audience in mind, I don't think they were sold as YA in the UK. I think they've always been sold, I think all of Sanderson's books have always been sold as sci-fi fantasy in the UK, like adult sci-fi fantasy, not YA. But Sanderson does write them, and he wrote the Skyward series as well, which was sold as adult sci-fi here, was sold in the US, and he's wrote it with a younger audience in mind, which is fine. I think these books read minimally easier than his Cosmere adult fantasy stuff, but his Cosmere adult fantasy stuff is very accessible, so probably would also be fine for young readers. Anyway, so yeah, one of the things I think that you get with his young reader stories, they have just about the same amount of darkness and the same amount of all this sort of stuff. So, you know, kind of all makes sense to me. Yeah, really interesting books, these Reckoners books. And they're very different to the Cosmere in that obviously they are a first-person single POV. So you see the entire book from David's point of view. I know that is actually an aspect of YA, that a lot of those are single first-person point of views. I almost would say that these books would really benefit from being multi-POV and being a bit longer and showing us a bit more. So, interestingly, that I'm saying I want more from these books, even though this book was a lot less focused. And I think a lot of that is because Sanderson is leaving the main reason they're there in New York as a mystery that unravels throughout the book, and it's not one I think you could really guess, I have to say. But yeah, so we have the whole book is kind of pivoting around this mystery of why they're in New York, what's going on with Regalia, what's going on with Phaedrus, who is the leader of the Reckoners, like what's he hiding. And I like a lot of I like a lot of what's going on. I would like to see more perspectives. I'd like to see what Mizzy thinks of David from Mizzy's point of view, you know, or really enjoyed the character of XL, and I would like to have seen more of that character, and would have liked to have seen a bit more about how that character thought. They had a really interesting backstory, which I won't spoil for you because obviously it's, you've got to read the book and it's later in the book. It's not an early revelation. They have a really interesting backstory, and I think would have been fun to have explored that. Would I recommend people read this book? Yeah, absolutely. This was fun. It was again, like the first one, it was a romp. I think that when I sat down to think about how I would rate it, I ended up rating this one a 4-star again. So I gave Steelheart a 4-star, I think. 4 or 5, but I'm pretty certain it should have been a 4. Gave Steelheart a 4-star because it was just so much fun. I really liked Steelheart as a villain, and the way that they kind of came up against him and figured him out, you know. And then I really liked Regalia as a villain in this, and how ambiguous her motives were and what she was doing, unclear what she was doing was. But on the flip side, I think a bit more clarity, a bit more focus would have helped. And the other aspect of this is that the book is called Firefight, right? Which is Megan's epic nom de guerre. And we don't actually see her for a lot of this book. She's really important in this book from David's point of view, because he's in love with her. But she's actually not in the book for the first third. And then she kind of comes and goes. So she will spend huge chunks of chapters away from the story. And when that was happening with, in Steelheart is barely in that book. He has a couple of appearances, but his shadow looms over the whole book. Whereas with Firefight, that's not really the case with what's going on with her. So I do think the book maybe was badly named, but I wonder if Sanderson was concerned, or like the marketing people were concerned, that if they named the book Regalia, it would seem a bit more like... Regalia to me sounds like a romantic YA book, you know? And I wonder if he's like concerned that people will pick up Regalia and go like, this isn't what I'm expecting from this book, or people won't pick it up because that's what they're expecting. Whereas Firefight is more accurate. There's a lot of firefights in this book, but the character Firefight is never referred to as Firefight and is largely missing from the book. So I'd say largely missing. She's in maybe a half to 2/3 of the chapters, I would say. But there are a lot of chapters where she's not even referenced. Whereas that really wasn't the case with Steelheart. He was kind of always there, in like hovering over the story. And I felt like, I don't know, like Firefight isn't the villain of the book and is never really thought of as that, whereas Steelheart obviously was. So yeah, it is a really interesting it's a really interesting book, and I did really like it. And I think that if I hadn't liked it so much, I wouldn't have as many criticisms. But then again, it is a good but flawed book, if that makes sense. So I really liked, I would say, the new cast are a major plus. I like the world building stuff we got in this book. There's a lot of lore and a lot of, there's like kind of, not an info dump, but we learn a lot more about how epics are made, why epics were made, how epics work. There's tons of that in this book. And it never really feels like an info dump. It always feels like you're learning something as David is learning something, because that's kind of how the story would flow. And I really like that. And it made me really excited to jump into the next book, which I am currently reading. I'm like 10 or 20% in, so not very far. I've been dual reading it with another book, and that other book I've been reading more simply because I have the physical of that, whereas Calamity I'm just listening to the audio. Anyway, with Firefight, I did mostly read this via ebook. I did pick up the audio, but I didn't love the audio. The quality felt a bit weird to me. It's one of those older audio books where it's not like perfectly recorded in a beautiful sound booth style of audio. It's fine. There's no big issues with it, but I preferred the ebook version. And yeah, I had a great time with the ebook. This is one that I had previously owned. I bought it years ago after I read Steelheart for the first time. So Steelheart was a reread and this was a first read. But yeah, I bought this years ago. And as part of my book buying ban this year, one of the things was I was like, I'm going to go through my Kindle library and try and read stuff I haven't read before that I already own. And Firefight was one of my first things that came up. So that was what pushed me to reading The Reckoners. I have also been kind of really enjoying Sanderson stuff lately and been wanting to pick his stuff up more and more and more. So yeah. So if you're here for book buying ban content, I didn't spend a penny on Firefight, which is great. Well, I didn't spend a penny on it this year. I spent it previous years, which counts. And Calamity, the next book, I actually got that from the library. So I'm reading a library version of that, a library ebook, which is pretty cool. And also the audio was from the library. I guess not many people are interested in Reckoners because both were just available straight away without any queue time. So that was fun. Anyway, I think it's time we wrap up this video because you may be able to hear it on the microphone, but my other cat, is meowing to get into the office. So thanks so much for watching. If you have liked this video, give it a like. If you've read Firefight, then drop down in the comments below and let me know what you thought of it. If you liked the book, if you didn't like the book, I think the consensus is, decent book, not as good as Steelheart. And I kind of feel the same way. I think I ended up rating both as like a 4-star, but in my mind, Steelheart is like a high 4, whereas Firefight is like a low 4. The place that we end the book, going into Calamity, is great. Loved it. But I think there's just a little bit of bloat and a little bit of lack of focus in the book. But anyway, we're not talking about that now. We're talking about finishing this video. So please subscribe if you haven't, to join our lovely little community. I'd love to have you here, and every little subscription helps. And I'll see you on Wednesday. Goodbye.